I've just come back from my sister's funeral, my heart completely shattered. All I wanted in that moment was a comforting hug from my son, but what greeted me instead was my entire life's worth of memories, just tossed out on the front lawn like a pile of trash. My daughter-in-law appeared with that sickly sweet smile of hers and said, "We're just clearing out all this useless old junk, Mom." And when my own son just stood there, silently siding with his wife's cruel act, I knew that was the last straw. My name is Linda Hayes. I'm a 72-year-old woman from Ohio, and this is the story of how I took back everything that was mine, right from the hands of the people I loved most. If my story resonates with you, I hope you'll keep listening and maybe share a piece of your own story with me, because no mother should ever have to endure being so utterly alone. The car ride home from the John Glenn Columbus International Airport felt like it took an eternity. I sat motionless in the back seat, my body feeling as heavy as the black dress I was wearing. It had been stuck to my skin for 3 days now, 3 days of forced condolences, hollow hugs, and the overpowering scent of white lilies in the funeral home. The smell of death, even now, in the tight space of the taxi, I could still smell it, a sickly sweet scent, mixed with the damp earth of the Phoenix Cemetery and the final image of my sister Grace lying there, looking terrifyingly peaceful after a 6-month battle with cancer had gnawed her away. I was the one who closed her casket. I heard the heart-wrenching cries of my 2 nephews as they said goodbye to their mother. I threw the first handful of dirt onto her fresh grave. I did everything a big sister was supposed to do, and now I was coming home, not just with a body bone tired and weary, but with a soul that had been hollowed out. Grace was the last piece of our generation, the only person left on this earth who still called me Big Sister Linda. Now she was gone. I felt like a lone, bare tree in the dead of winter. The taxi turned onto my familiar street. The lovely 2-story houses with their neatly trimmed lawns drifted past the window. I'd lived here for over 40 years. It was on this very street that John, my late husband, and I raised our James. Every tree, every corner held a memory. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the image of that cold grave and picture what I craved most right then. A tight hug from James, my son, a hot cup of tea he would make for me, a gentle, comforting word, "Mom, I'm here for you." That's all I needed. Just a little bit of family warmth to chase away the chilling cold of loss. "Here we are, ma'am." The driver's voice pulled me back to reality. I paid the fare, dragged my small suitcase out of the car, and stood before my house. No, the house I used to call mine. The 2-story home with the white picket fence and the front garden I had personally bought with money I'd saved over 40 years of cleaning other people's offices. The house I painted a pale yellow because I always dreamed of a happy, sun-filled home. The house that, 3 years ago, I signed over to James when he married Amber, because a mother always wants to see her child settled and happy. But something was wrong. The familiar wooden gate was strangely ajar. And there, on the lush green lawn that I was always so proud of, the best kept on the block, was a scene of utter chaos. A mountain of my belongings was piled up like a landfill. My heart skipped a beat. They must be having a yard sale I forgot about, I tried to tell myself. But as I walked closer, a cold dread washed over me. This wasn't for a yard sale. This was my life. John's floral armchair, the one where he sat and read the paper every Sunday morning, was now tossed in a corner, one of its legs broken. Beside it were cardboard boxes, burst open, revealing old photo albums, black and white pictures of my parents, my wedding photos with John, pictures of James as a little boy with a toothless grin. The wind flipped through a few pages, and I saw Grace's beaming face on my wedding day, as if she were laughing at my own naivety right now. My clothes were thrown in a messy heap. The blue sweater James had knitted for me the first Thanksgiving after his father passed away. The silk scarf John bought me on our 20th anniversary trip to Italy. And there, crumpled beneath an old shoe, was the woolen shawl my own mother had knitted, my last keepsake from her, now stained with mud. Everything, absolutely everything, from my personal papers and my beloved books to the little ceramic trinkets I'd collected, was all just thrown outside, exposed for the whole world to see, as if it was all worthless. My purse slipped from my numb fingers, landing on the grass without a sound. My throat was bone dry. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. What? What is this?" I whispered, but the sound was lost in the wind. I stood there, frozen, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare, some cruel joke played by fate. And then she appeared. The front door opened, and Amber stepped out, moving as gracefully as a queen strolling through her garden. She was wearing an expensive-looking pink maternity dress. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her nails were manicured, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a high-end salon, while I was still in my funeral clothes, my face gaunt from grief and lack of sleep. The contrast between us was so cruel, it was almost a sick joke. "Oh, Mom!" Amber chirped in that fake, sugary voice she always used with me. "Welcome home. We were just doing a little tidying up." She smiled, a radiant smile completely devoid of any remorse. She gestured towards the pile of junk, towards my entire life laid bare on the lawn. "You know, all this old stuff just takes up so much space, and it's all pretty useless now anyway." Useless? The word echoed in my head like a death knell. I looked straight into Amber's eyes. My hands began to tremble. "Amber," I said, my voice slow and raspy, "those are my things. Those are the family photo albums, my personal papers, my clothes." "Oh, yes, I know." She cut me off with a flick of her wrist, a gesture like she was shooing away an annoying fly. "But we need the space in your old room. We're turning it into a nursery for the baby." She placed a hand on her stomach in a proud, deliberate gesture. "Didn't James tell you? I'm 3 months pregnant." A punch right to the gut, invisible but powerful. Pregnant? And I had to find out this way? After my entire life had been thrown out onto the street? "Amber, I need to talk to James," I managed to say, but my voice broke. "He's at work, Mom, probably going to be late. But don't you worry," she said, stepping forward and taking my arm with a false intimacy that made my skin crawl. "We've already set up a little spot for you. Come on, I'll show you." She pulled me along, around the back of the house to the shed we always used for garden tools and old bags of cement. The damp, musty smell of rust and mildew hit me right in the face. She opened the creaky door. "Ta-da," she announced, her tone like she was presenting a wonderful surprise. "You can stay in here. We cleaned it up a bit, put in a cot. It's a little small, but it'll do." I looked inside. The room was no bigger than a large walk-in closet, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. It reeked of dampness. The only window looked out into a dark alley. The flimsy cot had a thin, yellow-stained mattress on it. Amber kept talking in that voice of hers, sweet as honey laced with poison. "But we'll need you to be discreet, Mom. You know, with the baby coming, we don't want any stress or anyone underfoot." Something inside me shattered. The grief, the humiliation, the shock, it all swirled together into a suffocating feeling. But at that exact same moment, something else, something deeper, was ignited. I looked her dead in the eye. Amber was still smiling, an expectant smile, expecting me to bow my head, to accept, to say thank you for being granted a corner in the very house I had paid for. Instead, I took a deep breath. I breathed in the smell of mildew, the smell of humiliation, and as I exhaled, a strange sort of calm washed over me. "You know what, Amber?" I said, and my voice didn't tremble. It was a calm that surprised even me. "You're right, it is time to clean house. A real spring cleaning, to throw out everything that's no longer useful." Her smile faltered for a second. I pulled my cell phone from my coat pocket. I found a number I had saved years ago. Mr. Peterson, my financial advisor. "What are you doing?" Amber asked, the fake sweetness gone from her voice, replaced by suspicion. "Cleaning house," I replied, my eyes never leaving hers. "Just like you suggested." I hit the call button. I heard the phone ring on the other end, and while I waited, I stared straight into Amber's eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't look away, because in that instant, I understood something. I gave this house out of love, but I never, not once, gave away my dignity. And they were about to find out who was really in charge here. Mr. Peterson answered on the third ring. His voice was warm and concerned, as always. "Linda, it's me. What's wrong? I know you just got back from Phoenix." "Mr. Peterson," I interrupted, my voice still eerily calm, my eyes locked on Amber's rapidly changing expression. I need to see you tomorrow morning. It's urgent." The pretense on Amber's face had completely vanished. Now, she was looking at me with narrowed eyes, calculating and dangerous. She was sizing me up, sizing up the new opponent she had just unknowingly created. "Are you all right, Linda?" Mr. Peterson asked, the concern in his voice growing. "No, I'm not," I replied, and for the first time all day, a small, humorless smile touched my lips. "But I'm going to be." I hung up the phone without waiting for another reply. I slipped it back into my pocket, its weight feeling like a weapon in my hand. Amber crossed her arms over her chest. "I don't know what little game you think you're playing, but let me remind you, this house belongs to James, and I am his wife. So, if you want to stay here, you'll play by our rules." I clenched my jaw. A white-hot rage was boiling up inside me. I wanted to scream at her that I bought this house with the sweat from 40 years of scrubbing other people's toilets, that every brick in these walls was paid for with my sacrifice, that James was just a 5-year-old kid when I handed him my entire life's savings without asking for a single penny in return. But I said nothing, because at 72 years old, I've learned one thing: words without power are just noise, and I needed to get my power back first. "Fine," I said simply, a fake surrender that caught Amber by surprise. "I'll stay in the shed." She blinked, clearly not expecting such an easy agreement. She had probably been hoping for a fight, for a dramatic scene, for me to break down and beg. "Oh, good. I'm glad you understand," she said, regaining a bit of her smugness. Then, as if to assert her authority one last time, she added another blow. "And one more thing. There's no room in the fridge for your things, so you'll have to buy your own food and keep it in your room, and we can't be sharing the kitchen all the time. The doctor said I need to avoid stress." I nodded slowly. "Of course. No problem." "Perfect. Well then, welcome to your new space," she said, before turning and walking back into the house, her hips swaying as if she'd just won a great victory. I was left alone in front of the dark shed. I stepped inside and pulled the creaky door shut. And only then, when I was completely alone in the darkness, did I finally let myself fall apart. The tears came, hot and uncontrollable. I wasn't just crying for the humiliation of today. I cried for Grace, my dear sister. I cried for John, my husband who'd been gone for 10 years now, who should have been here to protect me. I cried for the woman I used to be, strong, hardworking, and proud. And I cried for James, my son, the little boy I used to hold in my arms and whisper, "You're my hero." When had it all changed? Where had my love gone so wrong that it had turned around and bitten me? I sank down onto the musty-smelling cot. I looked around. The walls were stained with damp patches. A bare light bulb dangled from an electrical cord. There wasn't even a nail to hang a coat on. This is what they had left for me. A carefully planned humiliation. But then, through my tears, a memory flashed in my mind. I remembered my mother, a woman who raised 5 children on her own after my father left. I remembered her telling us, "My girls, a woman isn't strong because of what she has. She's strong because of what she can rebuild when everything is taken away." I wiped my tears. A new flame began to flicker in my chest, a fire lit from the ashes of my pain. I took out my phone. I started taking pictures. I took a picture of the shed, of the filthy cot, of my life's possessions thrown out on the lawn. I documented everything, because if life has taught me anything, it's that the truth always needs proof. I didn't sleep that night. I could hear every sound from the house I once called my home. After 11, I heard James's car pull in. I heard them talking. I heard Amber's sharp laugh. I waited. I stupidly hoped he would come, that he would knock on the door of this shed, that he would ask me just one question. "Are you okay, Mom?" after his Aunt Grace's funeral. But he never came. Around midnight, when the waiting had become a physical ache, I couldn't stand it anymore. I left the shed, my bare feet on the cold hallway floor, feeling every chill from the tiles. The same tiles I had picked out myself, had cleaned thousands of times. Now, I felt like a ghost in my own home. I stood before their master bedroom door. I raised my hand, hesitated, and then knocked softly. "James," I called out, my voice barely a whisper. Silence. "James, it's Mom. I need to talk to you." The door only opened a crack. My son peeked his head out. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. He was thinner than the last time I'd seen him. "Mom, it's late," he whispered. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" I repeated, feeling my voice crack. "James, they threw all of my belongings out on the lawn. They've put me in the shed to live. And you didn't even tell me Amber was pregnant." He looked down, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, I was going to tell you, but you were in Phoenix with Aunt Gracie." "I just buried my sister, James," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I just said goodbye to the last member of my generation, and I come home to be treated like a piece of garbage." "It wasn't on purpose, Mom," he said, rubbing his eyes. "We just need the space. With the baby coming, things have to change." "Change?" I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "James, I bought this house. I gave it to you because I thought you'd want me here, that we would be a family. And we are a family, Mom. But Amber, she's under a lot of stress. The pregnancy is hard on her. The doctor said we can't upset her." "And what about me?" I asked, feeling a bitter lump form in my throat. "Don't I matter?" James sighed, a long, weary sigh of someone completely worn down. "Of course you matter. But you have to understand. Amber is my family now, my priority. You're the one who always taught us that when you get married, your wife has to come first." Every word he spoke was like a knife twisting in my heart. "Not like this, son," I whispered. "Not like this. Mom, please. We're tired. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Just try to be understanding." And then he closed the door. Right in my face. I stood there in the hallway, trembling. My son, the baby whose diapers I changed, the boy I taught to read, the child I held every time he cried. That son had just shut the door on his own mother. I walked back to the shed like a sleepwalker, but I wasn't crying anymore, because something inside of me had shifted. The sorrow was slowly hardening into something else, into resolve, into a quiet, simmering rage, into the absolute certainty that this was not how my story was going to end. I sat on the cot and opened the drawer of the little nightstand. Inside, I kept something no one knew I had, an old notebook where I had recorded every major expense for the house since I'd handed it over to James. I began to turn the pages, and what I found made the blood in my veins run cold. But it also gave me the first weapon I needed for the fight ahead. It was 2 a.m. The shed was completely silent except for the steady drip of a leaky faucet somewhere in the main house, sounding like a clock counting down my dwindling patience. The air was thick with that damp, musty smell, but I didn't notice it anymore. My entire being was focused on the old notebook in my lap. It was a worn, brown, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with time. I've always been meticulous with money. I had to be. When you grow up poor, you learn the value of every single dollar. So, when I gave the house to James, I made one simple request. "Son, I just want you to keep me updated on the big expenses. Not to control you, but because this house is your asset, and assets need to be taken care of." He'd agreed. For the first year, James would show me the bills, tell me about minor repairs. We were a team, but ever since he married Amber, everything changed. He started saying he was too busy, that Amber would handle things, and I, foolishly trusting my son, didn't press the issue. A fatal mistake. Now, under the dim light of the bare bulb, I flipped to the last few pages. My hand was shaking, a surge of adrenaline rushing through me. In the last 8 months, since I'd been in Phoenix taking care of Grace, massive transfers had been made from the joint family bank account. I had access to the statements because James had given me a debit card for emergencies. I'd never used it, but I would occasionally check the transactions. And now, looking at it all together, the truth hit me like a slap in the face. January, $4,500. Living room remodel. February, $5,200. New furniture. March, $3.8. No description. April, $6,100. Trip to Miami. May, $4,8. Miscellaneous shopping. June, $5,400. Decorations. July, $7.3. No description. August, $7,900. Baby expenses. I did the math in my head. The number made me dizzy. $45,000, almost half $100,000 in 8 months. Where did that money come from? James is a good engineer, but his salary is about $3,500 a month. After paying for utilities, food, gas, what was left? Certainly not enough to be spending over $5,000 a month on luxuries. And then, a chilling memory surfaced, freezing the blood in my veins. When I gave James the house, I also left him with access to a savings account I had maintained for years. It was my severance pay from when I retired, plus other savings, nearly $60,000. I had told him, "Son, this is your safety net, so you'll never have to want for anything." With trembling hands, I rummaged through my pile of papers until I found the last statement for that savings account. I opened it, and my world fell apart. Current balance, $8,954. From $60,000 down to less than $9,000. The room started to spin. I had to sit down on the floor, my back against the damp wall, just trying to breathe. Over $50,000, gone in less than a year. And I had no idea, because I was too busy taking care of my dying sister, because I trusted my son, because I never, ever thought they would do this to me. But the money wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that I was being used. They had kicked me out of my own home, taken over my space, and humiliated me with the very money I had given them. A cold, hard anger began to replace the shock. I pushed myself up from the floor. My legs were still shaky, but I walked to the shed's small window. Outside in the dark alley, I could see a light on in my neighbor's kitchen. Mrs. Lucy. She was always up early, baking cookies to sell before sunrise. She was an older woman like me, a widow like me, a woman who had worked her whole life to raise her children, and right then I needed to talk to someone. I threw a robe over my nightgown and slipped quietly out of the house. I walked the 20 yards to her place and knocked softly on her kitchen door. "Who is it?" Mrs. Lucy's voice called out. "It's me, Lucy. It's Linda." The door opened immediately. Mrs. Lucy looked at me with concern. She knew I had just gotten back from the funeral. "My dear, what are you doing up at this hour? Come in, come in." I stepped into her small, warm kitchen. It smelled of fresh dough, a hot griddle, and freshly brewed coffee. It smelled like a home, the way my house used to smell. "Coffee?" she offered, pouring me a cup without waiting for an answer. I sat down at her old, worn wooden table, and then I just couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears started to fall. "Lucy," I whispered, "I need you to tell me the truth. Have you seen anything strange at my house these last few months?" She sat across from me, taking my hands in her own work-roughened ones. "My dear, I didn't want to say anything while you were away with your sister, but yes, I've seen a lot." "What?" Mrs. Lucy sighed. "Your daughter-in-law, Amber, she doesn't work, does she?" "No. James said she didn't have to, that he earned enough." "Well, dear, that girl has had a different car every couple of weeks. I've seen a red one, a white one, a gray one, and the bags she carries out of them are all from those expensive stores at the mall, the kind that cost thousands of dollars." A shiver went down my spine. "And James?" she continued. "I see him leave for work so early and come home so late. He looks tired, my dear, so tired and thin, like he's not eating right. Is there anything else?" Mrs. Lucy hesitated. Then she said, her voice softer, as if sharing a painful secret. "The other day I saw them selling your dining set, the old one. The one you kept in the formal living room, the carved wood one. Some men came in a truck and hauled it away. Your daughter-in-law stood there, smiling, counting a wad of cash. The coffee cup fell from my hands, shattering on the floor. That dining set, that damned dining set, it was my mother's inheritance. It was over 70 years old, brought here from Philadelphia by my grandmother when she moved to this city. A set that was worth a fortune, not in money but in history. And Amber had sold it like it was junk." "How long ago was this?" I asked, my voice hollow. 2 weeks ago, dear, while you were in Phoenix." I was silent. Mrs. Lucy got up to sweep the broken pieces of the cup, but I barely heard her. In my mind, the pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place. The missing money, the extravagant spending, the sold heirlooms, my clothes on the lawn, the shed. Amber wasn't just kicking me out, she was erasing me. Erasing my history, my memories, my very existence. And my son was letting her do it. I went back to the shed just as the sun was coming up. I sat on that cot, with the bank statements and my notebook in my lap, and I made a decision. If they wanted to play this game, then I would play too, but by my rules. Because they didn't know one very important thing. They didn't know that this house was still legally in my name. James had never filed the official paperwork to change the deed. I had only given him permission to use it verbally. They didn't know that I had the papers for everything. And they certainly didn't know that the woman sitting in this miserable shed was not the same woman who had arrived yesterday. That woman was broken. But from her ashes, something new was being born. Something stronger. Something far more dangerous. By the time the sun was fully up, I had a plan, and I swear, not even in their worst nightmares could they have imagined what I was about to do to them. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, I was knocking on Mr. Peterson's office door. I had washed my face in the backyard sink, since Amber had locked the main bathroom to keep me from using her hot water. I wore my best black dress, the one from the funeral. I had put my hair up in a neat, tidy bun, because I learned something over my many years. When you go to war to reclaim what's yours, you have to look the part. Mr. Peterson greeted me with a tight hug. "Linda, my friend, I am so sorry about your sister. Grace was a wonderful woman." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "But I'm not here about that. I'm here about something else." We sat in his office, a room filled with books and degrees. He poured me a glass of water and waited patiently for me to begin. I took out my notebook, the bank statements, the photos of my belongings on the lawn, everything, and I told him the whole story. As I spoke, I watched Mr. Peterson's face change from concern to surprise, and from surprise to outright indignation. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "Linda, this is serious, very serious." "I know. Does your son know you have access to those bank statements?" "He gave me the card years ago, but I think he forgot all about it. I've never once used it." The lawyer nodded slowly, thinking, "All right, we'll handle this one step at a time. First, the house. Do you have the deed?" "Yes, right here." I pulled the document from my purse. I had guarded that thing like it was the crown jewels. He looked it over carefully, turning each page with professional focus, and then he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a strategist who just found the winning move. "Linda, do you have any idea what we have here?" "What is it?" "The deed to the house is still 100% in your name. James never filed the official transfer of title with a notary." My heart skipped a beat. "But I gave it to him. It was a gift." "That's true, but legally speaking, gifting real estate requires a formal, notarized act. You gave him permission to live there. You gave him what we in the law call a license to occupy. You essentially lent him the house, but the house, my dear Linda, is still yours." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. "So, what does that mean?" "It means you can revoke that permission anytime you like. It is your property. Legally, they are your tenants, living there without a lease and with no long-term rights." I sat in silence, letting that sink in. "What about the money?" I asked. "The $45,000 that's just gone." The lawyer's face grew serious as he looked over the bank statements again. "There's something very interesting here. Look at these transfers. Many of them were done with a digital signature. Did you ever authorize these transactions?" "No, never." "And James had full access to the account?" "Yes, because I gave it to him when I let him have the house. I wanted him to have a financial cushion." "But did you ever sign any documents making him a co-owner of the account?" I thought back carefully. "No, he just had a linked debit card, but the account is in my name." Mr. Peterson folded his hands on the desk. "Linda, this is very delicate. If James made those transfers without your explicit permission, it could be considered misappropriation of funds. Technically, it's a form of familial fraud." Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. Fraud. My own son. "I don't want to send him to jail, Mr. Peterson," I said quickly. "I just want things to be made right. And they will be, but you need to get your negotiating power back, and to do that, we need to make a few moves." He pulled out a notepad and started writing. "Here's what we're going to do. First, today, right now, we are changing all of your bank account passwords. You will be the only one with access." I nodded. "Second, we will draft a formal inventory of everything that was in that house when you handed it over to James, including that antique dining set they sold. You are going to officially report the sale of your property without your permission." "I can do that?" "You certainly can, because you never took your name off the deed. Legally, everything in that house was still yours." I could feel strength returning to my body, a warmth spreading through my limbs. "And third, we are going to serve James with an official notice that he has 30 days to vacate the property or sign a formal lease agreement with monthly rent and very clear terms." "Rent?" I asked, stunned. "From my own son?" The lawyer looked at me with wise eyes that had seen 1,000 cases just like mine. "Linda, your son kicked you out of your house, put you in a shed, spent your money without asking, and sold your mother's heirlooms. Do you really think he deserves to continue living there for free?" He was right. Absolutely. 100% right. "And what if he refuses?" I asked. "Then we begin the eviction process. And believe me, with the evidence you have, a judge will rule in your favor in less than 3 months." I looked out his office window. Outside, the city of Columbus was just going about its day, the normal hum of traffic, people walking to work, street vendors setting up everyday life. And here I was, about to turn my entire world upside down. "Is there anything else?" the lawyer said, pulling me from my thoughts. "Do you have any other assets, properties, accounts?" I thought carefully. "Yes, I have a small apartment over in the old factory district. It was my husband's. We've been renting it out for years." "How much do you rent it for?" $1,800 a month. "And where does that money go?" "Into another bank account, one I opened years ago to cover the apartment's maintenance. James doesn't know about that account." Mr. Peterson beamed. "Perfect. So you have your own income. That changes everything. It means you can live independently if you decide not to go back to that house." The thought struck me like a bolt of lightning. Living alone at 72, after a whole life spent taking care of other people? "Mr. Peterson, I don't know if I can do that." "Linda," he cut me off, his voice firm but kind. "What do you want? Truly, from the bottom of your heart, what do you want?" I was quiet for a moment. What did I want? I wanted my son to apologize. I wanted him to treat me with the respect I deserved. I wanted my house back, my space, my dignity. But more than anything, I wanted them to understand that I am not a burden. I am not a piece of old furniture you can just throw away. I am not an inconvenience to be managed. I am Linda Hayes, a woman who worked tirelessly for 40 years, a mother who raised her child on her own after she was widowed, a woman who deserves respect. "I want justice," I finally said. "I want them to learn that you cannot treat people this way, especially not your own mother." Mr. Peterson nodded. "Then we are going to get you exactly that. But Linda, I need you to be prepared. This is going to be painful. There will be tears, shouting, begging. James will try to make you feel guilty. Amber will make up stories. They will say you're a terrible mother, that you're selfish, that you're crazy. They've already said all of that to me," I whispered. "But it's going to get worse now, because now you're fighting back, and when you fight back, people show you who they really are." I took a deep breath. "I'm ready." "Are you sure?" I thought of my mother's dining set, sold off like junk. I thought of the stolen money. I thought of that damp, dark shed. I thought of the door slammed in my face. "Yes," I said, my voice like steel. "I'm sure." "Then let's get started." I left Mr. Peterson's office 3 hours later. In my purse, I carried new documents, changed passwords, a detailed plan of action, and something far more important. I carried hope. I walked through the downtown streets with a steady stride. I bought myself a coffee and a pastry from a little bakery. I sat on a park bench and ate slowly, watching the people go by. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Because they thought they had beaten me. They thought they had broken me. They thought I would just bow my head and accept my fate as an invisible old woman. But they were very, very wrong. I wasn't a beaten woman. I was a woman preparing for a war. and they had no idea what was coming for them. James and Amber were about to get the biggest surprise of their lives, and I was going to be there to see it all. I got back to the house on Jericanda Street at 6 in the evening. The Columbus sky was gray, threatening rain, a perfect match for the heavy feeling in my heart. In my hands, I carried 3 bags of groceries. I had bought what I needed to take care of myself in that shed: a small electric hot plate, some paper plates, a little pot, and a few basic food items. If they wanted me to live like a tenant, I would do it, but as a tenant with dignity, I would not beg. I would not be dependent. Every item I placed in my shopping basket was a quiet declaration of independence. As I came through the gate, I heard voices and laughter coming from the living room. A lot of voices. I peered carefully through the large picture window that I'd spent a whole afternoon polishing just a few months ago. Inside, a lavish scene was playing out. Amber was there, dressed to the nines as if she were posing for a magazine. She wore a flowing emerald green dress that must have cost a fortune. Beside her were her parents, Mr. Armstrong, a large man with a mustache and a pompous look, and Mrs. Beatrice, a thin, elegant woman who always looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her shoe, and James. My son was there too, looking painfully awkward in a dress shirt and slacks. He kept tugging at his collar like it was choking him. The entire room had been redecorated. A brand new cream-colored leather sofa, a modern glass coffee table, and a white shag rug. Everything was sleek, expensive, and completely foreign. They had erased every trace of me, of John, of our family, and replaced it with a soulless, glamorous showroom. "Mom," Amber chirped when she saw me, that fake sing-song voice back in full force. "Welcome home. I've prepared a family dinner." My parents wanted to come over to better understand our situation. Our situation, as if it were some problem that needed to be managed. "Good evening," was all I said, trying to walk straight to the back of the house. "Oh, no, no, no," Amber said, stepping forward and grabbing my arm with a surprising amount of force. "I've made a whole meal. It would be rude not to join us. Besides, we need to talk about a few important things." I had no choice. I sat down at the dining table. My dining table, the one I had bought at an antique market 15 years ago. Amber served dinner with a perfect smile. Chipotle-style roasted chicken, red rice, a salad. Everything looked delicious. Everything smelled like a home, but the air was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. During the meal, I stayed silent and just listened. Mr. Armstrong went on and on about his business successes. Mrs. Beatrice complained about her maid. Amber detailed the hardships of her pregnancy, the terrible morning sickness, and all the expensive baby items she had to buy. James barely said a word, just stared down at his plate, pushing his food around. I watched my son. I saw the deep-seated exhaustion in his eyes, the stress in his every movement. He wasn't happy. He was just playing a part in Amber's play. My heart ached for him, but the anger was stronger than the pain. After dinner, just as I was about to stand up and retreat to my new space, Mr. Armstrong cleared his throat, signaling the start of the main event. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "My daughter tells me there have been some misunderstandings lately." "Misunderstandings? Throwing a person's entire life out on the lawn is a misunderstanding?" I didn't respond. My silence seemed to fluster them. Mrs. Beatrice chimed in, her voice sharp. "Amber tells me you've been feeling a bit out of sorts. But you must understand, Linda, that young people need their own space, especially with a baby on the way." And then they got to the heart of it. They wanted to put me in a nursing home. They used all the fancy words. Senior living community, full amenities, nursing care on site, people your own age for company. Every word they said was a sugar-coated insult. They were telling me I was a burden, an inconvenience, and that it would be best for everyone if I just disappeared. I looked at James. My son still hadn't looked up from his plate. "James," I said, my voice steady, "what do you think about this?" He finally raised his head. His eyes were tired, empty. "Mom, I just want everyone to be okay. I want peace in the family." Peace. A peace built on his mother's sacrifice and humiliation. I didn't say another word. I just stood up, said a cold, "Good night," and walked straight to the shed. I could feel their eyes on my back, a mixture of surprise, annoyance, and maybe just a little bit of triumph. They thought my silence was acceptance. They were wrong. The next day, I spent the morning making the necessary calls. First, the bank. I changed all the passwords, blocked James's access to the savings account, and requested a detailed statement of all transactions from the past year. The teller on the other end of the line sounded surprised, but she complied. Next, I called an antique appraisal company, sent them the photos of my mother's dining set, and asked for a formal valuation. In the afternoon, I went back to Mr. Peterson's office. He was ready for me. "Linda, I've gone over everything again," he said, pushing a folder across the desk towards me, "and it's even better than I thought." He pointed to a clause in the personal loan agreement I had signed with James 5 years ago. It was a formal, notarized contract. "Look here, Clause 4B. The borrower, James Hayes, agrees to maintain a stable and respectful family environment for the lender, Linda Hayes, as a condition of this interest-free preferential loan. Any action deemed disrespectful or causing mental or physical harm to the lender may be considered a breach of contract, allowing the lender to call for the immediate repayment of the entire remaining principal." I stared at him, stunned. "I don't even remember that clause." Mr. Peterson smiled. "Your husband, John, insisted on it. He said, 'I trust my son, but I don't trust the people he might marry.' He had foresight, Linda." Tears welled in my eyes thinking of John. Even from beyond the grave, he was still protecting me. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice steady again. "We're not going to call the loan in immediately," he said. "That's too big of a blow. We'll start with a warning shot." He handed me a pre-drafted letter. It was an official notice of breach of credit terms. The letter stated clearly that James had violated Clause 4B by mistreating his mother, and it demanded that he and his wife appear at the lawyer's office within 7 days to discuss remedial options. "It doesn't directly demand the money, Mr. Peterson explained, "but it will terrify them. It will force them to realize you are not a weak old woman they can bully. You hold their financial future in your hands." "Do it," I said, without a moment's hesitation. Friday, the day the letter arrived. I was expecting it. I sat in my shed, the door cracked open, watching the back of the house. Around 3 in the afternoon, a FedEx delivery man showed up at the front door. Amber answered. I saw her sign a little electronic device and take the large white envelope with a curious look on her face. She went inside. I waited. About 5 minutes later, I heard a scream. A shrill, furious scream. "James, you get down here right now." I heard James's hurried footsteps on the stairs. Then, silence. A heavy, terrifying silence. And then, the war began. "What is this?" Amber's voice was so loud it drowned out the TV. "Is your mother suing us? Who does she think she is?" "Calm down, Amber." James's voice was faint. "Let me see." "Calm down? You're telling me to calm down? That old witch is trying to ruin our lives. She's threatening to call in the loan. Where are we going to get that kind of money?" "I don't know. I'll talk to her." "Talk to her? We are way past talking. This is an act of war. I told you we should have gotten her out of here. We should have put her in that home last week." "Amber, please. My mom just lost her sister." "I don't care about her sister. I care about our baby, about our future. You need to do something, James. You're the man of the house. Start acting like one." Their fight went on and on. I heard something crash, a door slam. I sat on my little cot, listening to the chaos I had created. Did I feel satisfaction? No. I just felt a profound sadness. Sadness for my son, who was too weak to stand up for his own mother. Sadness for myself, for having to resort to this just to be treated with a shred of respect. But beneath the sadness, something else was growing, a sense of power. For the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I was the one in control. The days following the lawyer's letter passed in a tense, suffocating silence. The house was a minefield where any wrong step could set off an explosion. Amber stopped speaking to me altogether, not even her fake greetings. She would glide past me in the hallway as if I were invisible, but I could feel her hateful glare on my back. James avoided me completely. He left for work earlier and came home later. Dinners were no longer filled with fake laughter, just the heavy clinking of forks against plates. I knew they were panicking. Mr. Peterson's legal notice wasn't an empty threat, and they knew it. It was like a ticking time bomb placed right in the middle of their living room, and they had no idea how to defuse it. I let the silence and fear do their work, gnawing at their confidence, fracturing a relationship that was already built on lies. On the fourth day, the silence broke. James knocked on the door of my shed. It was the first time he had come to me willingly since I'd returned. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. He couldn't look me in the eye. "Can we talk?" I just looked at him, waiting. "That letter. Mom, why would you do this? Are you trying to ruin my life?" I looked at him, a deep disappointment welling up inside me. Even now, he saw himself as the victim. "I'm not ruining your life, James. I'm trying to save what's left of mine. Did you ever once stop to ask yourself why I had to do this? Did you ever put yourself in my shoes, for even 1 second, to feel what I've been through?" He hung his head. "Amber, she's been under so much stress. She didn't mean to." "Stop blaming Amber, James." I cut him off, my voice sharp. "You are a grown man. You have eyes to see and a brain to think. You saw my belongings thrown out like trash. You saw me put in this room. And you did nothing. You chose to stand with her. That was your choice, no one else's. Now you can live with the consequences." "But the money? We don't have it. If you call in that loan, my business will go under, everything I've built will be gone." "Then maybe you should have thought of that before you let your wife sell your grandmother's dining set for pocket change," I said, my voice ice cold. "Do you have any idea what that set was worth, James? The appraisal company said it's valued at a minimum of $15,000. What did Amber sell it for to go on a shopping spree? Did you even ask her?" James was stunned. It was clear he didn't know. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know, because you chose not to know. Now, if you have nothing else to say, I need to rest." I closed the door, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with the truth I had just thrown in his face. I knew this conversation wouldn't solve anything, but it was necessary. He needed to know I wasn't backing down. Just as I predicted, desperation pushed them to their final move. 2 days later, I saw a car from a real estate agency parked out front. A woman in a sharp business suit got out, holding a folder. Amber greeted her at the door with a radiant smile, like she was welcoming a savior. They were trying to sell the house. Sell my house to save themselves. I smiled to myself. They were walking right into a trap they didn't even know existed. I immediately called Mr. Peterson. "They're making their move, sir. The realtor is here." "Excellent, Linda," he said, his voice calm. "Let them proceed. I have everything ready. The second bomb is about to drop." And it did, the very next day. An explosion even bigger than the first. Mr. Peterson was as good as his word. As soon as the real estate company began the title search and due diligence at the county recorder's office, they hit a brick wall. Their lawyer called James and Amber with devastating news. There was a serious problem with the ownership. According to the official records, Mrs. Linda Hayes was still the sole legal owner of the property. That was bad enough, but it got worse. New detail 1. Mr. Peterson, with the sharp eye of a seasoned lawyer, had discovered something I didn't even know. While reviewing recent transactions tied to the property, he found a new mortgage for $30,000 that had been taken out 6 months ago, right after I left for Phoenix. The lender was a small credit union, and on the loan agreement was my signature, a clumsy, obvious forgery. They had been desperate enough to forge my signature to borrow money. This was likely the cash they had used for the living room remodel, the new furniture, and that trip to Miami. The rage inside me burned white, hot, but it was controlled by an icy calm. This was no longer about disrespect. This was a crime. Immediately, Mr. Peterson filed a criminal complaint on my behalf for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. At the same time, he petitioned the court for a temporary injunction, freezing any sale or transfer of the property until the criminal case was resolved. Their plan to sell the house was dead in the water. Not only were they broke, but they were now facing the very real possibility of prison time. New detail 2. That legal bombshell set off a catastrophic chain reaction. The pressure from all sides, the business loan being called in, the house being unsellable, and now a criminal investigation hanging over their heads pushed things to the absolute breaking point. And that's when the final, most devastating bomb of all exploded. Amber's mother, Mrs. Armstrong, showed up at my door on a rainy afternoon, looking like a completely different person. The elegant, haughty woman was gone. Her makeup was smeared with tears, her hair was a mess, and her expensive clothes were rumpled. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice trembling, I need to talk to you." I let her in. We sat across from each other in the foreign living room her daughter had created. She broke down, sobbing, and told me a story more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. "Amber, my daughter, she's not pregnant," she confessed between sobs. "She's infertile. She has been for years. The doctors said she can't have children naturally." I was frozen. My entire body went numb. "This whole thing was a lie," Mrs. Armstrong continued, her voice desperate. "She married James for this house. She has a massive gambling debt. The loan sharks are threatening to hurt her. She thought if she could sell the house, she could pay them off and start over. The pregnancy, it was just a way to manipulate James, to trap him, to make him do whatever she wanted." She showed me her phone, showed me the text messages from Amber, messages confessing everything, planning the lie, and filled with contempt for James, calling him an easy-to-lead fool. "I can't take it anymore, Mrs. Armstrong cried. "I'm terrified for my daughter. I'm afraid she'll be arrested. I'm afraid the loan sharks will find her. I don't know what to do." I listened, not with satisfaction, but with a numbing horror. My son had been systematically and cruelly deceived. He had sacrificed his mother, his dignity, for a lie. Just then, James came home. He walked into the living room, saw me sitting with his mother-in-law, and his face went pale. "What's going on?" he asked. And then, Mrs. Armstrong, in her panic, told him everything. Every word was like a hammer blow to James. I watched the color drain from his face, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to horror, and finally, to complete and utter devastation. When he learned he wasn't going to be a father, that his entire world of happiness and hope was a sham, something inside him broke. That extreme psychological shock was the trigger. It officially set off the genetic time bomb that had been lying dormant inside him. The neurological condition his father, John, had struggled with in his final years, a seizure disorder brought on by extreme stress. James started to tremble. His eyes went wide and vacant. He stumbled, then collapsed onto the white shag rug. His body began to convulse violently. "James!" I screamed, rushing to his side. Mrs. Armstrong screamed in terror. Amber, hearing the commotion, came running down the stairs. When she saw James seizing on the floor, her entire scheme exposed, her meal ticket gone, a look of animal panic filled her eyes. She didn't run to her husband. Instead, she turned and ran back to the bedroom. A few moments later, she bolted down the stairs with a handbag, grabbed her purse and car keys from the table, and fled out the front door, disappearing into the rain. She ran. She abandoned her husband convulsing on the floor, abandoned the wreckage she had created. I knelt beside James, trying to keep him from hurting himself. I called 911. In that moment, all the anger, all the plans for revenge, it all vanished. All that was left was a mother, desperately trying to save her son. The wail of the ambulance siren tore through the quiet night of our neighborhood. The flashing red and blue lights cast ghostly patterns on the pale yellow walls of the house, on Mrs. Armstrong's terrified face, and on James's seizing body. I followed the ambulance, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything was happening in slow motion, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I'd forgotten to grab a coat or my purse. I was alone, in my house clothes, rushing into the night with my son, who was on the verge of collapse. At Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital, James was taken straight to the emergency room. I was stopped at the door, left alone on a cold plastic chair in the waiting area. The smell of antiseptic, the beeping of machines, the hurried footsteps of nurses, and the moans of other patients created a symphony of pain and anxiety. I sat there, motionless, staring at the closed doors where doctors were fighting to bring my son back. During those long, long hours, my mind went blank. There was no more room for anger or revenge. My entire existence had shrunk down to a single primal fear, the fear of losing James. No matter how badly he had treated me, no matter how he had broken my heart, he was still my flesh and blood, the son I had carried. A mother's instinct had taken over, eclipsing everything else. About 2 hours later, an older, tired-looking doctor came out of the ER. He was looking for me. "Mrs. Hayes?" I shot to my feet. "Yes, that's me. My son, how is he, doctor?" "We've gotten the seizure under control," he said, his voice calm but serious. "He's stable, but he's very weak. We've sedated him, and we're moving him to the neurology unit for observation. The seizure appears to have been triggered by an extreme psychological shock." He looked at me with a questioning gaze. "Do you have any idea what might have happened to him, ma'am?" I hesitated. What could I possibly say? Recount the entire saga of tragedy, lies, and betrayal? "Our family, we've just been through some major upheavals, doctor." The doctor nodded, as if he was used to such vague answers. "I understand. He needs complete rest. Stress is his biggest enemy right now. We also found his father's old medical records in our system. It seems this condition is hereditary. You need to be prepared, Mrs. Hayes. This could be a long road to recovery." When James was moved to a private room, they finally let me in to see him. Seeing him lying there, his face pale, IV lines taped to his arm, the heart monitor beeping steadily, my own heart ached. He looked so fragile and vulnerable, just like he did when he was a little boy with a high fever. I pulled a chair up to his bedside and took his cold hand in mine. "Mom's here, James," I whispered. "It's going to be okay. I'm here." And I stayed there, all that night and all the next day. I didn't go home. That house was just an empty shell now, filled with painful memories. I just sat beside James, wiping his face, adjusting his blankets, and listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. In the quiet of the hospital room, I had time to think. What was I doing here? Why was I caring for the child who had turned his back on me, who had chosen another woman over his own mother? Was my presence a sign of weakness, of forgiving too easily? No. I realized this wasn't weakness. This was duty. I was here not because I had forgiven him. I was here because I was his mother. Those are two very different things. Forgiveness is a choice, a process that requires time and genuine remorse from the other person. Caregiving, in this situation, was an instinct, a responsibility I couldn't turn away from. I would not abandon my child at his lowest point. But that didn't mean I would forget what he had done. On the third day, the calls started coming. James's phone rang constantly. He was still heavily sedated, so I answered. The first call was from the bank about the fraudulent mortgage. "Hello, may I speak with Mr. James Hayes or Mrs. Amber Hayes, please?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Linda Hayes, James's mother," I replied, my voice calm. "James is currently in the hospital and unable to take calls. As for Amber, I have no idea where she is." "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that. Ma'am, I'm calling from the legal department at Columbus Credit Bank. We just wanted to inform you that we've received the legal complaint from your attorney regarding the mortgage loan." "Yes, I'm aware," I cut her off. "Any and all legal matters should be directed to my attorney, Mr. Peterson. I have nothing further to say." The second call was from one of James's business partners, his voice frantic with worry. "Mrs. Hayes, I can't get a hold of James. We have a huge contract deadline coming up, and his company is on the verge of collapse because of some loan being called in. What's going on?" This time, my voice was firmer. "I'm sorry for your difficulties, sir, but James's business problems are his own responsibility. I am here as a mother caring for her sick child, not as the COO of his company. When he is awake, I will tell him you called." And so it went. Calls from other creditors, from the credit card companies Amber had maxed out. With every call, I gave the same cool, detached response. I had drawn an invisible but very clear line. My love for James, the son lying in that hospital bed, was unconditional. But I would not bail out the mistakes, the debts, and the consequences that James, the grown man, had brought upon himself. He had chosen his path, and now he would have to walk it on his own. I would be there to hand him a glass of water, to give him his medicine, but I would not carry his burdens for him. It was a hard decision. A part of me, the mother part, wanted to fix everything, to make it all go away. But the other part of me, the part that had been so deeply wounded, the part that had learned a hard lesson about dignity, knew that doing so would only cripple him further. He needed to face the consequences. It was the only way he would ever truly grow up. Mrs. Armstrong came to visit once. She brought a fruit basket, her face gaunt with guilt. How is he, Mrs. Hayes?" she stammered. "He'll be fine," I replied, not inviting her to sit. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. My daughter, she's a monster." "She's your daughter," I said, my voice flat. "And she's a fugitive. The police are looking for her for fraud. Do you know where she is?" She shook her head vigorously, her eyes filling with tears. "No, I have no idea. She hasn't contacted me." "Then I don't believe you have any reason to be here." I showed her to the door. I had no time for her remorse. Her regret couldn't heal my son, and it couldn't give me back what I had lost. The days in the hospital passed in a blur. I read books, I talked to the nurses, and I sat quietly by James's bed. I had called my other 2 children, Sarah and Tom, and told them what happened. They were on the next flight out, their hearts filled with a mixture of rage and worry. I knew that when they arrived, another storm would break, but I was ready. I had found a strange peace in my decisions. I had drawn my boundaries. I was a mother, yes, but I was also a person, and I would never again let anyone, not even my own son, trample on that person. James woke up on the 5th day. It wasn't a sudden awakening like you see in the movies, but a slow, hazy return from some foggy place. His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. The white fluorescent light of the ceiling stung his eyes. The smell of antiseptic was sharp and foreign. He could feel a dull ache in his head and the prick of the IV needle in the back of his hand. His eyes stared blankly at the white ceiling, lost and disoriented. "Mom," he whispered, his voice so hoarse and weak it sounded like it hadn't been used in years. I had been reading in the corner. At the sound of his voice, I put my book down, my heart giving a little leap. I walked over to the bed and looked down at his gaunt face. "I'm here, James. You're awake." He turned his head to look at me, his eyes struggling to focus. In them, I saw a deep confusion, as if he was trying to piece together the shattered fragments of a terrible memory. What happened? Where am I?" "You're in the hospital, James," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and gentle. "You collapsed. The doctor said you had a seizure from extreme stress." I tried to keep my voice even, not wanting to agitate him, but when I said the word stress, the memories came rushing back to him like a flash flood. I saw it in his eyes. The horror, the pain, the humiliation. "Amber," he stammered, each word like a razor in his throat. "The baby, it was a lie. All of it. It was all a lie." Tears began to stream down his cheeks, soaking his pillow. The hot tears of a grown man crying like a lost, heartbroken child. "She played me, Mom. She played all of us." I said nothing, just took a tissue and gently wiped his tears. No words of comfort could soothe this kind of pain, only the truth, and he had to face it. "Yes, James," I said softly. "It was all a lie." He closed his eyes, his body trembling. I was such a fool, a blind fool. "I hurt you. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." He broke down into sobs, deep, gut-wrenching sounds that came from a place of utter regret. I just sat there silently, my hand on his shoulder, and let him cry. He needed to. He needed to purge all the pain, the remorse, and the self-loathing that was tearing him apart. After a long while, when his crying had subsided to quiet, choked hiccups, he took a deep, shuddering breath. There seemed to be one last thought, one final piece of the horrific puzzle he needed to confirm. He opened his eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, and looked at me. Where is Amber, Mom?" he asked, his voice raw. "When I fell, where was she?" I looked him straight in the eye. It was time for the final truth. "When you fell," I began, my voice even, devoid of emotion. "I didn't see concern for you in her eyes, James. I saw the panic of a cornered animal whose show was finally over." I paused for a second, letting my words sink in. "She didn't run to your side. She didn't call for help. She turned and she ran upstairs. I could hear drawers being pulled open, frantic rustling. A few moments later, she came flying down with a handbag, grabbed her purse and the car keys from the table, and ran out the door like a thief." I looked deep into my son's eyes, forcing him to face the cruelest truth of all. She took whatever cash was left in the house and she left, James. She left you there, convulsing on the floor, and she never once looked back. James said nothing. He wasn't crying anymore. The tears seemed to have run dry. His face became a blank, terrifyingly calm mask. He slowly turned his head and stared out the hospital window. There was nothing out there but the blank brick wall of the next building, gray and dull in the pale afternoon light. He just stared at it, as if searching for some answer in its emptiness. It wasn't the silence of anger or resentment. It was the silence of final acceptance. The silence of a man who has just seen the absolute bottom of the abyss of deceit. Any last illusion, any flickering hope that there might be some other explanation, was extinguished. All that was left was the raw, cold, undeniable truth. He had lost everything: his wife, the child that never existed, his money, his company, his health, and his mother's respect. In that moment, he had absolutely nothing. He sat there in that silence, staring out the window, for a very long time, until a nurse came in to check his vitals. And I knew, from that moment on, my son would either be consumed by that abyss forever, or he would have to learn how to climb out of it, starting from nothing. The play was well and truly over. It was time to face reality. In the days that followed, James slowly began to recover physically. He could sit up, feed himself, and walk a little around the room. But mentally, he was a wreck. He barely spoke, just sat quietly on the bed, staring out the window with that same empty gaze. Psychiatrists came to talk to him, but he only gave them monosyllabic answers. My other two children, Sarah and Tom, arrived. Their presence was a whirlwind. Sarah, my strong-willed, outspoken daughter, stormed into the hospital room, took one look at James's pathetic state, and her anger erupted. "James!" she yelled. "What in the hell have you done with your life? And what have you done to Mom?" Tom, my quieter son, had to pull her out into the hallway. "Sarah, not now. He's sick." "Sick?" Sarah hissed in the corridor. "I don't care. He let that witch treat our mother like garbage. He slammed the door in her face, and now he's lying in there feeling sorry for himself. Mom is the one we should feel sorry for." I had to go out and intervene. "That's enough, both of you. Arguing here won't solve anything." Sarah turned to me, her eyes red. "Mom, why are you even here taking care of him? After everything he did to you? You should just leave him." "He is your brother, Sarah, and he is my son. No matter what happened, that doesn't change." For the rest of their visit, I was caught in the middle. On one side was James, drowning in his depression and guilt. On the other were Sarah and Tom, filled with righteous anger and resentment. I felt like a tightrope walker, trying to keep a family on the verge of shattering from falling apart completely. But through it all, I held my boundaries firm. When the lawyers from the bank and the creditors tried to contact James, I stopped them. He needs time to recover. All financial matters will be dealt with later. But I never promised that I would be the one to deal with them. Slowly, James began to open up. He told me, in broken pieces, about his relationship with Amber, about how lonely and insecure he had felt, and how Amber had come in like a bright light, filling all his empty spaces with fake praise and admiration. He had blindly believed every word she said, ignoring all the warning signs, because he was so desperate to have the perfect family. "I just wanted to make you proud," he said one afternoon, his voice thick with regret. "I wanted to show you I was a success, that your sacrifices were worth it, but I ended up destroying everything." I listened without judgment. I understood his fears, but I could not excuse his weakness. And then, the day came for him to be discharged. The doctors said he was physically well enough to go home, but he would need to continue with therapy and stick to a strict medication regimen to control his condition. The night before his discharge, I sat by his bed long after he had fallen asleep. I looked at his face, now thin and gaunt, etched with the lines of suffering. I raised my hand, about to stroke his hair, but then I pulled it back. A painful decision had formed in my mind. The next morning, I was up before dawn. I gathered my few personal items. I spoke to the head nurse, giving her instructions for James's discharge paperwork. Then, I wrote a short note. I went to his bedside and looked at him one last time. He was still sound asleep, breathing steadily. I placed the envelope on the table beside his bed, Then I turned and quietly left the room. I walked down the long hospital corridor, past the faces of strangers, and out into the morning Sunday. I didn't look back. James, when he woke up, would not find me there. He probably expected me to be there, to help him pack, to take him home, to care for him as I had for all those days. He probably thought that my care meant forgiveness, that everything would be erased, and that we would go back to the way things were. But he was wrong. When he opened the envelope, he found only a small amount of cash, enough for a taxi and a month's rent in a cheap motel room, and the note, with my handwriting, "You are well enough to stand on your own 2 feet now. It's time you learned how to walk. Mom." I can only imagine his shock, that sinking feeling, the sudden crushing loneliness that must have hit him. He probably called me, but I had turned my phone off. He probably called Sarah and Tom, but I had already told them not to intervene. This was something I had to do, not because I hated him, but precisely because I loved him. My love could no longer be a crutch for him to lean on. He had to face the wreckage of his life on his own. He had to deal with the debts himself. He had to find a place to live on his own. He had to rebuild his life from scratch, all by himself. Loneliness sometimes is the cruelest but most effective teacher. I had given him my care when he needed it most, when he was hovering between life and death. But now he was awake, and it was time for him to face the consequences of the choices he had made. I disappeared from his life, not as a punishment, but as a test to see if he had truly learned his lesson, to see if he was strong enough to get back up after falling, or if he would continue to wallow in self-pity. I had given him the chance to atone, but he would have to do it alone, and I would watch from a distance with a heart that was both hopeful and aching. My disappearance left a huge void in James's life, a void that no one else could fill. Tom told me later that James had truly panicked. He called my phone dozens of times, only to be met with the endless ringing of a phone that would not be answered. He called his siblings, sobbing into the phone, asking why Mom had abandoned him. Sarah was firm. "Mom didn't abandon you, James," she told him. "She's giving you a chance to become a man. Don't waste it." That shock, that extreme loneliness, became the most powerful catalyst. He had no other choice but to stand on his own 2 feet. With the little bit of money I'd left him, he rented a small, rundown studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The apartment had a bed, a small stove, and a window that looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door. It was a world away from the beautiful 2-story house he once called his own. And he started to work, not as an engineer in his own company anymore. That company was bankrupt, seized by creditors. He started over from the very bottom, working a manual labor job at a warehouse, loading and unloading freight. The work was hard, the pay was low, but he did it, quietly and consistently. He sold his expensive car and took the bus to work. He cooked simple meals for himself. He lived a Spartan life, a kind of self-imposed penance. Once a month, I would receive a letter. There was never a return address, just a Columbus postmark. The letters never begged or pleaded. They were simple progress reports. The first month's letter: "Mom, I got my first paycheck today. I used it to pay off the smallest credit card bill. My apartment is cold at night, but I'm getting used to it." The 6th month's letter: "Mom, I was promoted to shift supervisor. It's a little more money. I've started making payments to the bank. I'm still going to therapy every week. The doctor says I'm making progress." The letter after 1 year: "Mom, today is the 1-year anniversary of the day I left the hospital. I've paid back all the old business partners. I learned how to make that beef stew you like, though it's not as good as yours. I hope you're doing well." I read every single letter. I kept them in a wooden box. Each one was a testament to his change, another brick in the foundation of the new man he was becoming. I never wrote back. My silence was part of the lesson. He needed to do this for himself, not for my forgiveness. I had started my own new life as well. I sold the house on Jericonda Street. It held too many painful memories. With the money from the sale, plus what John had left me, I bought a small house in the country, about an hour's drive from Columbus. It had a big garden where I could grow my vegetables and my flowers. I found a sense of peace in working the land, in the quiet of nature. Sarah and Tom brought the grandkids to visit on weekends. My life was simple, but it was full. 3 years passed, 3 years of unanswered letters. One Sunday afternoon, as I was puttering around in my garden, an old pickup truck pulled up to the front gate. A man got out. He was tall and steady on his feet, but his hair had hints of gray at the temples. His skin was tanned from the sun and wind. It was James. He had changed so much. The soft, pampered look of his younger self was gone. In its place was the steady, weathered look of a man who had walked through a storm. He stood at the gate, not daring to come in, just looking at me in silence. I looked back at him. We looked at each other across the distance of 3 silent years and a universe of pain. Finally, I straightened up, dusted the dirt from my hands, and walked to the gate. I unlatched it. "Come on in," I said, my voice even. He walked in, following me to the back garden, where I had a small table and chairs under a trellis of bougainvillea. We sat down. The silence was heavy between us. "Your garden is beautiful, Mom," he finally said, his voice deep and a little hoarse. "Thank you, Son," I replied. He took a deep breath. "Mom, I didn't come here to ask for your forgiveness. I know what I did is unforgivable. I've spent the last 3 years trying to become a man you wouldn't have to be ashamed of. I started my own small woodworking shop. I work hard. I've paid off every last one of my debts. I just wanted to come and say I'm sorry." He hung his head, and his broad shoulders trembled. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." I looked at him, the son I thought I had lost. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the remorse in his very being. He wasn't the weak James of the past. He had truly grown up. I didn't say, "I forgive you." After everything, those words felt too easy, too cheap. Instead, I stood up. I went into the house. A few minutes later, I came back out. "Come inside for dinner," I said. My voice was still even, but maybe, just maybe, there was a little warmth in it now. "I've made that beef stew you like." He looked up, his eyes shining with surprise and a glimmer of hope. He nodded, unable to speak. That was our first dinner together in over 3 years. We didn't talk much, but the silence this time was different. It wasn't the silence of tension or resentment. It was the silence of understanding, of a new beginning. When he left, I walked him to the gate. "Come back next week," I said. "The garden needs tilling." A smile, the first real smile I had seen on his face in years, broke through. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be here." In his later visits, we never spoke Amber's name. It was as if she were a bad dream that had vanished with the morning light. But I knew that ghost still lingered somewhere in his mind. One afternoon, as we were weeding the garden together, he suddenly stopped and looked off into the distance. "Mom," he said softly, his voice hesitant. Did you ever hear what happened to her?" I stopped my work too and looked him in the eye. "My lawyer told me. The police issued a warrant for her arrest for fraud and forgery, but she disappeared. Probably skipped to another state or even out of the country." James nodded slowly. He didn't look pained, just weary. "The divorce. My lawyer said it's finalized. In absentia." "Then it's over," I said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Yeah," he replied, and he picked up his hoe and went back to work with a new resolve. "It's really over. Now there's just the work to be done." In that moment, I knew he had truly let go of the past. He never asked about her again. She had become a tattered old chapter in the book of his life, one he had decided to tear out and never read again. And so had I. And the work to be done, as he put it, was incredible to watch. He didn't just rebuild his career, he rebuilt the bridges he had burned. He called Sarah and Tom, not to make excuses, but to listen. To listen to Sarah's anger, to Tom's disappointment. He took it all, without a word of complaint. It took a long, long time, but his persistence and his genuine change finally melted the ice. Now, 5 years have passed since that fateful time. My little house in the country isn't so quiet anymore, especially not on the weekends. Today is one of those days. A beautiful Sunday in late September, the sunlight like honey pouring down on the garden. Under the bougainvillea trellis, where James and I had that first talk after 3 years apart, there now sits a long wooden table that he built himself, big enough for the whole family. Sarah and her husband, Mark, are trying to reason with their 2-year-old son, who is having a tantrum because he can't have another cookie. Tom is sitting with his oldest daughter, Emily, looking through one of the old photo albums I managed to save. Her clear laughter rings out as she points to a picture of a little boy with a toothless grin, a young James. And James. My son is standing at the barbecue grill, expertly flipping ribs. He looks so different. The familiar features are there, but his eyes now hold a look of peace and self-assurance. Every so often, he turns to talk to his wife, a gentle preschool teacher named Chloe. They got married last year, a small, warm wedding right here in this garden. Chloe isn't glamorous or flashy, but in the way she looks at James, I see sincere respect and love. "Mom, the salad is ready," Chloe calls out, bringing over a big bowl, as bright and fresh as her smile. "Thank you, dear." I smile back. I sit on my porch swing, a glass of iced tea in my hand, and I just watch. I look at my children, my daughter-in-law, my son-in-law, and my grandchildren playing on the lawn. The chatter, the squeals of the kids, the sizzle of the grill. It all blends into a symphony of life, of happiness. None of us talk about the past, not because we're trying to forget, but because the present is so full and so bright that the shadows of yesterday have no place to hide. It's become an old story, a lesson learned, now tucked away in the back of a memory drawer. James brings the platter of hot ribs to the table. "Dinner's ready," he announces with a booming voice. My granddaughter, Emily, runs over and throws her arms around me. "Grandma, the picture of Uncle James as a little boy is so goofy." The whole family laughs. James laughs too, a deep, easy laugh. "Hey, that was the style back then." I hug the little girl, breathing in the sun and hair smell of her. I look around at each beloved face. Sarah, joking with her husband. Tom, patiently explaining something to his daughter. James, lovingly placing a rib on Chloe's plate. In that moment, a feeling of immense warmth and gratitude washes over me. I walked through hell. I had to make the most painful decisions a mother can make, but in the end, I made it here. Heaven isn't a place without suffering. Heaven is right here, in this moment, surrounded by true love, watching the people you care about find their own happiness. And I know everything I went through was worth it. So you see, that's how my story ends. There's no fairy tale ending where everyone hugs and cries and all is forgiven in an instant. Life isn't like that. The scars are still there. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I still remember that day, the pile of my life on the lawn, the door slammed in my face. The pain doesn't disappear completely. It just becomes a part of me, a reminder of the price of blind trust and of weakness. But I learned an invaluable lesson. I learned that a woman's dignity isn't something that's given to you by others. It's in the boundaries you draw for yourself. I learned that forgiveness isn't a free gift. It has to be earned through genuine remorse and change. And most importantly, I learned that a mother's greatest love, sometimes, isn't holding on, but having the courage to let go, so her child can learn to fly on his own. My life is very peaceful now. James keeps his promise. He visits every weekend. We work in the garden together, fix things around the house. He tells me about his work, about the tables and chairs he builds with his own two hands. In his voice, I can hear the pride of a man who built his life back from the ashes. Our relationship has been rebuilt, not on the faulty foundation of the past, but on the solid ground of mutual respect and understanding in the present. I don't know if the crack in my heart will ever fully heal. Probably not. But now, when I look at James, I no longer see betrayal or disappointment. I see a man who learned his lesson, a survivor. And I'm a survivor too. We're two survivors, learning how to mend together. And maybe, just maybe, that's what family really is. Not perfection, but the ability to stand back up together after you've fallen, to cultivate a new garden on the very ground that was once made barren by a storm. And our garden, now, is finally beginning to bloom.